Good afternoon. This session, named this session, Plural Forms, Theoretical and Empirical Evidence. The plural forms of coordination of transactions are important objects of scientific research today. Plural forms of business coordination are hybrids arrangements. Cooperation, relationation, networks, trust, represent governance structures for institutional economics in recent years. The purpose of the session is to present today's studies that help scholars of institutionalism to understand this phenomenon better. Thank you, presence for everyone. First presentation, Mr. Emmanuel Renaud, Dinha. Second presentation, Silvia Sais e Vivian Lara Silva, São Paulo University. Okay.
Tranquilo. Okay. Vale. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is my first time in Brazil, and I hope this is not the last. So next year, if you could invite me again, I will be happy to come back. You decide. So what I'm gonna present you, it's not a paper of my own. I have nothing to sell to you today on that specific topic. That's not completely a survey either, even it is not that far from a survey. What I really would have loved to talk to you, that's a kind of cliche. I do apologize for that at the beginning, but Brazilian players have been super important in my favorite soccer team, football team, we are not in the US, which is Paris Saint-Germain. Just let me, however, remind you just a few names. You're probably familiar with all of them except Claude Ménard, who is French-Canadian, so know nothing about football. The first one, the best one from my point of view. Great, great, great gentleman. His first year in Paris was a disaster, but after that. The second one is now the boss of the Paris Saint-Germain team. We also had Ronaldinho for 2 years, and after that he decided to leave because he had some kind of incompatibility with the coach, as usual, I should say, in a way. And by the way, go to Google and Google RAI Brazil. You go after that to images, and you end up with her. And she's not Brazilian. She's a Bollywood star. So more seriously, the presentation is about the prevalence of dual distribution, and I will define a dual distribution in a minute. And especially, I will show you briefly show you some statistics about the prevalence of dual distribution, and I will spend some time trying to describe what are the economic motivations that have been analyzed in order to understand this particular form of organization. And I will focus mostly on franchised chain, okay? Because the plural form is a broader concept that only the coexistence of different organizations within a chain, but I will focus my talk on franchising. So I will start with a general overview, let's say, of the plural form in the governance landscape. I will try to explain you how can we explain such a prevalence, and I will give you some clues about what we still have to look at in order to deeper our understanding, of the plural form. So the general, as usual, organization, Nobel Prize, Williamson. Alternative families of governance structure, and mostly bilateral governance structure. Most of Williamson's work is based on this idea of bilateral contracting. And I think that Claude will speak maybe tomorrow a bit on that. The idea is that for some transaction characteristic, uncertainty, asset specificity, the usual suspect, hybrids can outperform market and hierarchy. Exactly the same idea, but with the tools of the modern tool, I should say, of economic organization, game theory. You have this paper by Baker, Gibbons, Murphy on strategic alliance. I mean, and just a quotation, they also show that we should, it's not a surprise if we observe a huge diversity of alternative governance structure, because many of these governance structure can be second best. So in that respect, it's not surprising to observe a diversity of governance structure, so it's not surprising to observe also a diversity of ways of organizing, governing a franchised chain. Let me just give you an example taken from this forthcoming paper by Henrikse, where they try to disentangle alternative form of chain governance, okay? The company-owned chains. McDonald's, for instance, that's not true, by the way, but assume that McDonald's owns all the units worldwide. That's what we call a company-owned chain. Wholly franchised. McDonald's owns no single units and franchised all the units. Something which is quite interesting from my point of view and not very explored, that's what I call the cooperative franchised. By this, I mean the fact that the franchisees own the franchisor. I have a beautiful example in France of a franchised chain organized like this, but maybe the best well-known brand using that kind of system is Best Western. Okay? And finally, the dual distribution. Basically, what dual distribution means simply means that within a given chain, you have coexistence of company-owned units, unit owned by the franchisor, and unit owned by franchisees. And that's what we call the plural form. So just to give you an example, McDonald's in France, but I guess that the pattern is way more general than simply in France. 30% of the units are company-owned, owned by McDonald's, while 70% of the units are owned by franchisees. I will come back to that later, but it doesn't mean that you always have one franchisee owning one unit. You agree? Okay. Just to give you that's old data, consider only the blue, the color on the top, okay, which is the proportion of company-owned units above 5%. And you see that it depends on the kind of sector of activity. So there's a diversity to explain, which is good when you want to make some economic, some empirical analysis. But the dual distribution is the prevalent mode of organizing a franchised chain, not only in France, but worldwide and in many sectors, even if the proportion of company-owned units vary depending on the sector and sometimes depending on the chain itself. General, back to Williamson, which is this famous Williamson alignment principle, which is the big locomotive. I mean, transaction cost economics is an empirical success story, and I guess it is. If you try to think of the dual distribution using that kind of framework, the unit of analysis is the individual transaction. The implicit assumption is that there's a selection process somewhere that sort inefficient way of governing economic transaction, okay? So in the end, if we do observe plural form as in franchising, that should mean, according to Williamson, that this is because there is some good efficiency, because efficiency dictates the chains to organize their units using the franchise, the plural form, sorry. So, what are the sources of these efficiencies? And now I will survey a various set of papers that I try to understand, to dig deeper into the source of this potential efficiency. And I will disentangle 4 cases, actually, when people that I try to understand this dual distribution phenomenon, assuming that we do have heterogeneous units. Let's say a McDonald's in Ipanema does not have the same characteristic, the same local market as the McDonald's that could be at the International airport. And with that kind of assumption, we can explain the emergence of dual distribution. But people also looked at a way to explain dual distribution by assuming homogeneous unit, which is assume that all the units are completely identical. Still, we can explain the creation of that kind of dual distribution system. The second issue is works that have looked at dual distribution as a transitory phenomenon. By this, I mean that at some point in time, we observe a coexistence of various modes of organization, but we should converge toward either a purely company-owned unit or purely franchised unit. And there's also a bunch of papers that claim that no, that's not true, and there's empirical evidence showing that this is not true. So we still have to explain why dual distribution is still prevalent. So I will start, if I remember well, by the explanation based on heterogeneous units, sorry. Individual transaction can be heterogeneous for many, many reasons. Just to give the first 2 examples. Distance to headquarters, okay? If the McDonald's headquarters in Brazil is located, I don't know where it is, by the way, in, let's say, Sao Paulo, and if you compute the geographic distance between the headquarters and each unit, there will be differences, by definition. The proportion of repeated business, sometimes, depending on the sector, depending on the industry, depending on the industry, most of your consumer visit you on a very regular basis. Bakeries in France, for instance, okay? And for other transactions, the repeated business situation is very low. I mean, I'm not going every weekend into a hotel, for instance. So if I apply the alignment principle a la Williamson for each location, that's quite simple. I have to think of the most efficient governance structure, meaning the one that minimizes the transaction cost. So, and I do that for each individual unit. In the end, sometimes it might be optimal to franchise. For some units, for other units, it might be optimal to rely on vertical integration. In the end, at the chain level, we do observe dual distribution, but simply as a byproduct of this aggregation of individual decision. Okay? Then, with that kind of framework, how to explain the fact that in the same local market, sometimes you have both company-owned unit and franchise unit side by side. Tricky question when you rely on that kind of assumption of a heterogeneous unit. Homogeneous unit, no. It's purely a mental thing, but assume that all the units are identical. Can we explain dual distribution even in that kind of situation? For some people, the answer is yes. The previous result is that if they're homogeneous units, we should observe either company-owned units or franchised units, but no the coexistence of the two. The first explanation has been developed is dual distribution, the coexistence of company-owned units and franchise unit, is a signaling devices. The franchisor, for the potential franchisee, there's uncertainty on the value of the brand. There's uncertainty on the type of the franchisor. Will it be very helpful? He promised that he will invest a lot in marketing. Ex ante, I have no idea. So I need, as a potential franchisee, I need some kind of reassurance. I need the franchisor to convince me that if I invest my money into his business, in the end, I will have a payback. How can the franchisor can signal his value? In this story, the best way to do this is by linking his own profit to the profit of the units. There's two ways to do that. The first one is to have a high royalty rates, okay? The tax that the franchisor will collect on the franchisee revenue. If the royalty rate is high, that means that the franchisor profit is heavily linked to the franchisee profit, okay? The alternative is to own some unit. If the franchisor owns himself some unit, he will have a huge stake in the profitability of the chain. So that might give me incentives to invest because I think that the franchisor is also involved in his chain. The second explanation that have been put, for instance, is the following. Franchising strongly relies on two things: the effort put by the manager of the unit, but also by the national advertising, national campaign, in order to attract new customers. It's a moral hazard kind of issue. But there are two specific tasks. One is trying to sell, a selling effort, and the other one is effort dedicated on marketing. The problem is that one of these efforts has a public good nature. If I advertise, I will benefit from the money I invest in the advertising, but you will also benefit. And you can easily show that the optimal amount that I would like to invest is different from the efficient one. So one way to generate this kind of investment in marketing is to specialize some unit in providing advertisement, in providing effort that will improve the value, the reputation of the brand. How I do this? I own some company and I put a flat salary to the managers. If I put a high-powered incentive to that people, they will have incentive to sell, to increase the sale at the expense of the effort they should make in order to improve the value or the reputation of the chain. If I put a flat or fixed salary, the incentive will be more balanced. In that sense, they will provide some effort in order to improve the reputation of the chains. So, okay, and you can generate dual distribution in that system. And it doesn't rely at all on this idea of heterogeneous units. The third explanation, dual distribution, and that's the traditional one, the oldest one, actually. I come back to this idea of Galini and Lutz that I own some unit in order to signal the quality of my chain, in order to attract you to come into my chain, in order to attract your money, or as a way to credibly commit to the value of the chain. I mean, one of the main tasks of the franchisor is not only to advertise, but it's also to monitor the franchisee. what are the franchisors' incentives to monitor the franchisee. It's costly. I have to send people checking the quality of the food, for instance, in some restaurants, and I could decide to save on that cost. Here, the idea is that as the asymmetric information, if I deal with a franchisor, or if I am a franchisee and I deal with my franchisor on a repeated basis, or if I am a franchisor and I deal with my franchisee on a repeated basis, we will know each other better and better and better, which means that the asymmetric information, which is at the basis in that explanation of dual distribution, will reduce. And if the asymmetric information problem is no longer a relevant one, what we should observe either a shift, I will come back to this one, either a shift toward purely company-owned units or a shift toward purely franchised unit, depending on what you consider to be the most efficient organization. The second explanation that I've been put, and that's historically the first one, is that I franchised not because this is more efficient, because I don't have enough capital, but I need to open quickly a large number of units in order to benefit from economies of scale or economies of scope in marketing, for instance. But I do not have the capital. I do not have the money to open all that stores. So what I can do, I can sell the business to franchisee, and the franchisee will provide the capital. But if my chain become more and more successful, this constraint in terms of resources, in terms of capital, should reduce. So in the end, I want to have all the units belonging to me. So I should buy back all the units because I don't need any more. If my chain is mature enough, I don't need any more the franchisee in order to supply me with the capital I didn't have at the beginning. So here I should observe what the literature in marketing called the ownership redirection. I start to franchise, but progressively I end up with 100% company-owned units. All these explanations are interesting, and there's some value, but how to explain this? That's a statistic from French franchised chains, but it applies as well in the US and even in Brazil. The observation is the following. At the beginning of the life of the chain, there's a large proportion of company-owned units. Progressively, the franchisor attracts new franchisees, but that does not converge either to 1 or to 0. There's a constant amount of company-owned units. There's a kind of target, let's say, and that target can be industry-specific or even chain-specific. Wendy's and McDonald's might have different optimal proportion of company-owned units, okay? But that clearly refuted the fact that we should observe a tendency either toward pure franchising or pure vertical integration. When you do have, at least in the economics of organization, when you observe the coexistence and the prevalence of coexistence of alternative governance structure, one of the usual suspects in order to understand that is to say that there's probably some complementarities between the two, okay? Having the two systems together is better than having only one of the system. So that's the definition of complementarity given by Milgrom and Roberts. Applied to franchising, that simply means that relying on franchised units makes company-owned units more effective, and vice versa. Okay, but what are the source of this kind of synergistic benefits? plenty of sources have been described. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. And I'm going to skip this one as well. The only important thing that you have to remember with these slides is that each governance structure has weaknesses and strength. And the idea is that by combining the two, one can mitigate the weaknesses of the others. Okay, just to give you an example. Because of the franchise contract, the franchisees are the residual claimant. After paying the royalty rates, 80, 85, 90% of the profit is for my pocket. That gives me very strong incentive to boost my sale or to maximize my profit. But there's two ways to maximize the profit. I can increase the sale, and I can also minimize the cost. One way of minimizing the cost is cutting quality, for instance. So by the very fact that the franchise contract provides me high-powered incentive to boost my profit, it also provides me incentives to minimize my cost and to free ride, for instance, of quality, which is not the case with the company-owned units. What are the influence the patterns that have been described to explain the benefits of having the two systems? I will just give you a list of 6 factors. Most of them, you will find them in this, probably the most interesting, from my point of view, work that have been done on franchising, which is not by an economist, but by the management scholar. The guy is Jeffrey Braddock. He was in the academic business. My guess is that he now is in the business. He left. But he wrote this book on franchised organization, which is brilliant from my point of view, very, very deep. And he lists a set of factors that could explain the beneficial effect. The first one is ratcheting. I will use the performance of my units as a franchisor in order to persuade the franchisee that what I propose can be good for them as well. And I will use the performance of the franchisee that have very strong incentive to boost sales, to go back to my company-owned unit and say, hey guys, these folks can reach that amount of sales. You should be able to do the same because you are using the same system. Structure replication, and that's, according to Braddock, that's very good for the uniformity of the chain. The fact, if I do have 100 franchised units within my chain, it doesn't mean that I do have 100 franchisees. I can have 2, okay? Each franchisee owning 50 units. That's what we call the multi-franchising system. At some point, McDonald's in Paris had 1 master franchisee, and the guy was owning all the McDonald's restaurants within Paris, downtown, a long time ago. He has been kicked out of the business, by the way, by McDonald's that was very unhappy with his behavior. But if as a franchisee, I am also responsible for several restaurants, I will have a strong incentive to rely on the organizational tools that have been provided by the franchisor to organize the big chain. The third point, socialization. It's simply the fact that recruiting new franchisee can be costly because, I mean, you have to pass through a whole selection process. One thing I can do if I want to keep open some new restaurant and to franchise them is to ask some of the best workers working in my own units to become franchisee. I know them, and they know the system quite well. That it will be easy for them to adapt to the system because they know him quite well. I will pick the one in the middle, the safeguard against lock-in. I don't know if you will put the slide on the website after that. Anyway, there will be my email address, and you're welcome to send me an email if you want the slides. Okay. So having said that, I should skip to the other one. Now, what did we learn with that dual distribution system with regard to the most prevalent analytical theory that are used to explain economic organization? Does this invalidate the alignment principle a la Williamson? I would say yes and no. No, in the sense that if my unit of analysis is the unit or the individual transaction between the franchisor and the unit manager, no, I'll select the most efficient form of organization. And I'm completely online with the alignment principle a la Williamson. But if I take a system perspective, dual distribution suggests that for similar store or for similar transaction, at least there's a range of parameters where either the two seems equally efficient, I mean beyond the crossing point of this well-known figure by Williamson, or it doesn't catch the idea of these synergistic benefits. Having the two is a source of profitability, improved profitability. Yeah. French flag. Everything is in Williamson, unfortunately, in a way. So you just have to pick and choose. And sometimes the guys contradict himself, like everybody. Williamson already mentioned this fact of coexistence of alternative governance structure, but according to the first sentences, the underlying logic is unchanged. We are safe. The second one, he changed his mind a little bit. If we do not take into account some system-wide perspective, we could end up with incorrect prediction if interaction are missed or if holistic consequences are glossed over. Fantastic English, Williamson. The third one, back to the roots, rely on the alignment principle, and if, for instance, you consider that there's something which is shaking the logic of the system, it's only if you consider that there's something that is shaking the logic of the system that you should start to think in a different way as the one Williamson provides. So the basic question is, where are we? Are we close to the incorrect prediction? Are we close to the unchanged logic? I mean, to be honest with you, I have no answer to that. I'm quite sure that if I was managing a chain, I wouldn't manage a chain unit by unit. But it would be wise from a managerial point of view, I guess, to have a more broader perspective. The last point, if I remember well, the governance of franchise chain is not only deciding, or should I vertically integrate or should I franchise? It's also about the design of the franchise contract, the number of franchisees I will hire. Can I give them the possibility to have additional units? It's also thinking about the monitoring system. It's also the possibility that I can give them the possibility to create a franchisee association, and I will bargain with that franchisee association instead of bargaining on a bilateral basis. I mean, there's many margins that the franchisor can play with. And from my point of view right now, we know very little about the interaction between all these different mechanisms. The last point, the performance explication. If there is some synergistic benefits of using at the same time company-owned units and franchise units, we should observe systematic variation, performance variation among the chains that rely on that plural form as compared to chains that use only franchising or vertical integration. It's not that easy to assess the chain's performance, especially if you go on to have some financial information, because that's private information. So most of the paper rely on notions of performance such as survival and growth. but I'm not aware of any empirical studies that dig into this performance implication of dual distribution system. Last, for the young part of the crowd in this session, from my point of view, there's still some space to work on this economics of dual distribution, but it's no longer enough to try to replicate what have been done mostly in the US, okay? A good paper, a paper with original data, a paper with the same data but not American data or European data. If you come to the scene with, my paper is interesting because I do have new data, Brazilian ones, but you are looking at the same problem as the folks who work on that before, that won't be enough in order to get published in the good top A review, American, and blah, 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 blah. Why is that? Because of her. Francine Lafontaine, the franchising queen, or the queen of franchising, whatever. She's editor at the Journal of Law Economic of Management, Law Economic and Organization. She's co-editor at the Journal of Economics and Management Strategy. So when she sees a paper passing with franchising, in the end, she will have the residual right of control. I mean, in the sense that she will decide whether or not the paper will be published. So there's the best way to have a paper published in franchising is to ally with her and to make the paper with her. Believe me, that's a good strategy. And that's it. Thank you, obrigado. I hope I wrote it correctly. I'm sure about the muchas gracias. The grazie, the merci aussi, the tabernacle. Claude will explain you tomorrow what tabernacle means. And you have a selected list of references. Thank you very much.
The Francis cases are important objects of scientific research of the plural forms of coordination of transactions. And now we have two panelists, Mrs. Maria Silvia Sais and Vivian Lara dos Santos, de São Paulo University, Brazil. Please.
Okay, hello guys, good afternoon. It's very nice to be here with Sylvia, discussing with you. Yes, it's my first time in Brazil. And we hear as well. So, and it's a very nice opportunity, and I'm really glad to be here discussing with you some empirical evidence out of franchising and considering plural forms puzzle. And about plural forms, we are thinking about what Emmanuel, in a brilliant way, tells us, like dual distribution. And Roberta is not here because she's pregnant. Wow. And the baby is, no, not probably, but dando trabalho já. So she's relaxing from now, but with us in thought. So let's start this presentation. What amazing puzzle you have here. I mean, it's an amazing puzzle phenomenon to study about plural form. Just because even a long run of studying, like Emmanuel told us, considering Braddock, we have an opening avenue, we have an opening question concerning plural form. In terms of plural forms are not able to be predicted so far. But also because this puzzle, plural form puzzle, can stimulate a friend Brazilian long-standing alliance. And it's quite difficult to Brazilian guys think about friend Brazilian alliance, because it's quite difficult to think about sport fields like Emmanuel. And so some pictures like that, it's quite difficult for us forget about. So let's shift. And thanks God, we have good souvenirs. Think about French and Brazilian alliance. In particular at SNI or WWIL conference, like this one. And so let me remember last year when we have fun, and I'm sure that this year as well. As Sylvia told us, we have here in WWIL amazing opportunity to hard work, but have fun as well. So it's amazing to be here. And also because consider plural forms puzzle in terms of a French-Brazilian alliance, this is not new as well. I mean, everything, the history began 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, also with a FAPESP project with Paulo Furquim de Azevedo, and Claude Menard, with me. And now we are together once and again in a CNRS and FAPESP project discussing this puzzle with Emmanuel and Sylvia, and everybody here is invited to join us. Okay, and in that context, our main talk here, the main goal of my talk here is to link Emmanuel's talk with Claude's lecture tomorrow afternoon, discussing recent empirical efforts in the literature about plural forms puzzle. And how exactly? I mean about shedding light on the discussion of plural forming, showing you, discussing with you how widespread, it's difficult to say this word, but how widespread, thank you very much, is this puzzle, considering different segments, but also how many motivations we can consider for better understand their existence. And so, for this presentation, Sylvia and I, we picked up some empirical evidence about plural forms, and we're trying to go further in the evidence. I mean, trying to pick up different cases for sharing our minds. And so we have here 3 different cases, I hope so, considering product, the driver of the relationship, and also the motivations. Well, about the products, we will discuss about fine wine, alcohol, and also green branded products, growing industry related to tomato, eggs, and corn. The second case, it will be about, and the cases are also different, considering the drivers in terms of, we have the growers, the processing firms, and also the distributors, like the drivers. And the last difference is about motivation. And here is, I need to tell you, well, hello, about the motivations. For this presentation, we make a revision process of works, empirical works, and the motivation was the one stated by the respondent. But also, we collected primary data. Thank you. And so we will show you both of them, kinds of data. Well, starting. Case 1 is about Vale dos Vinhedos, and I'm talking about a wine agro-industrial chain that from 2002 has an original label indication. And with this label, Vale dos Vinhedos reúne, sorry for my, a group, aggregate 31 wineries in this label. And here, in Vale dos Vinhedos, we can find, for a semi-transaction, for a same kind of wine, a fine wine, we can observe a same firm governing the relationship with the producers using 4 different governance structures. So it's a case of plural forms or dual distribution. Well, in fact, plural forms downstreams. For instance, inside the Vale dos Vinhedos, you can consider 2 different vinícolas, as you say in Portuguese, Vinícola Cordelier and Vinícola Dom Laurindo. And both of them use 2 different governance structures. A portfolio of different contracts with suppliers, about 30%, but also together, combining, they have a vertical integration, about 60%. And Carlos Schmidt, that has done this study, show us that plural forms raise economic performance of the wineries, das vinícolas. The second case is about Coin. Coin is the first Brazilian green chicken processing firm, and also we are talking about a green agricultural system. We are talking about HAP chickens, yes? And they have developed a VAL label, Associação da Avicultura Alternativa. And Coin commercialize fruits and vegetables, but also poultry and eggs, with a valid added of minimum 30% if you compare with alternative brand products. And in this case, the most interesting, at least for us, is that the same company employs plural form strategies, downstreams and upstreams. The same company. For instance, if you consider for tomato production, the brand name aspects concerning tomato are about the problem that the green traditional system are related to low production. And the greenhouse gives to the company huge investments. So the risk for the company or the Coin deals with risks concerning quantity, quality, and hold-up problems. For trying to solve these risks, Coin company used to combine vertical integration, nowadays 10%, coming to 30% in the next years, and also a portfolio of contracts governing the suppliers. And the motivations that the interviews, the respondent, stated for us, this case, it was collected by Silvia, I, and Roberta, and Paula Schneider as well. The boss, the driver, tell us about supply guarantees, knowledge, control, and quality and standards. But Coin also employs plural forms for eggs production. And here, the risks are different. If you think about brand name aspects, here we are thinking about animal welfare and the issue of more space. And so we are talking about investments, huge investments. And here, the risks are supposed to be related to quantity and quality. And for trying to solve that, Coin use, in a combined way, one single contract, just one supplier, and together vertical integration. And here, the guy tells us about it's more cheap for the company production eggs in a vertical integration, but also about knowledge, control, and quality. And corn, it's quite the same, but here we have a very interesting problem because corn is an annual harvest. But the problem is that once the product is organic, they could not, green system production, they have a problem for stock during the year. And so, during the perishability. And so the risk is about quantity and quality as well. And they are trying to figure it out using contracts with vertical integration and telling us about the supply, lower cost, and quality. And about the distribution, upstreams, plural farm strategy. Corn use these 3 different marketing channels and tell us about this motivation. Brand name diffusion, economic rent appropriation, and final reason, together geographic dispersion. Going further, about alcohol industry. Here, our third case, we picked up 2 cases inside. I mean, plural farm strategies in the governance of sugarcane purchase, and plural farm strategy in the governance of ethanol distribution. And thanks to Pedroso, this is about his PhD thesis. In general, industry, the usinas, the alcohol industries, use it to employ these 6 combinations of governance structures to assemble transactions. This is the puzzle. Why? Why not just one and the 6th one? Well, if you look inside one company, for instance, we will see not the 6th one, but, for instance, for Adecoagro, a usina owned by a very, very poor guy. The usina is owned by George Soros from 2008. This usina, this group, in fact, has 2 usinas, Monte Alegre and Angélica, and each one combine as well different governance structures, as we try to show you here. Another example inside, and why, how can we explain that? The guy tells us about the risk of to be dependent on supplier, or even how can the usina, how can the industry, alcohol industry, incentivize the producer to enter in the business. And so, with this combination, they believe that they are dealing with cartel and quantity volume risks. Another example about Moema, it's a group of usinas of industry alcohol. We are talking about a group that inside Unica, market share of Unica, they represent 10%, and it's an alliance of 90 different industry of alcohol. And here, this usina, this alcohol industry employs at the same time for a same transaction 4 governance structure. And for that, the guy told for us, for Pedroso, about risk of cartel and quantity. Well, but the history about industry alcohol is still more interesting, because if you look the upstreams, downstreams, we can also observe plural form phenomenon in the distribution of fuel. Okay? I mean, consider all Brazilian food distribution. If you can consider all the system, just one food distribution has vertical integration. I'm talking about Cosan that has bought ESSO company. All of other ones employs spot market and contracts in the purchase transaction of anhydrous and ethanol. To try to be more illustrative here, we can see in this table, we can see the large one and the small one, distributors of fuel in Brazil, and all of them, doesn't matter the scale, employs a combination of different governance structures for the same transaction. And the risk could be related to cartel and quantity as well. And so, what this evidence can show us? Why I spent some few minutes with you showing this evidence? Well, it was like an effort of shaking our minds and trying to see that pluriformis phenomenon is yes, widespread. Oh my God, first lesson in English. And the puzzle, the problem is that the puzzle has only begun to be solved. I mean, we are in the beginning of the way to better understand this puzzle. But I hope that some clues have appeared in my talk. I mean, cases could show us how complex are pluriform strategies in terms of empirical reality and the motivations, but maybe or mainly about the different motivations. The different cases that I show you can suggest us motivations regarding risk of cartel, cartelization, quantity, brand name value, and also that this could be an increased gain strategy for the drive of the relationship. And about that, it seems that pluriforms are complementary in the governance of inter-firm relationships. And so it seems, it seems at least for us, that strange is not to employ pluriforms. But the main question is how to explain, or better, when pluriforms are expected to happen. This is the main question that we are interested here, that we, for so long time, we are discussing and think about, and remains open. And for trying better answer that, or at least to be closer, we believe that it's necessary to go further with the knowledge frontier, starting with a theoretical arguments review, and it's about Claude lectures tomorrow morning. And well, the group, the French-Brazilian team stand here, and I'm done here as well. Thank you very much. Muito obrigada.
Thank you for the invitation. Let me tell you, this is the toughest job I ever had as a discussant, because I was preparing what my talk here while they were presenting, because there was no previous paper, and also the presentations were very comprehensive, so there's not much left to say actually, but I just want to emphasize a few things here. First of all, I liked the presentations very much. I learned a lot, both in terms of reviews and the empirical evidence that you brought. I just want to emphasize three things that I think are very important. First of all, the issue of a unit of analysis that Emmanuel actually raised, fundamental, because if you observe a certain, say, chain and observe that 35% of that is franchised, and you say that, well, therefore there's a synergistic effect, etc., without controlling heterogeneity in the resources, the activities of the firm, that may be a huge mistake, basically, because as Emmanuel said, there may be differences in terms of the units. I mean, a chain may have a distant unit and a closer unit, or a unit of a very capable entrepreneur, and etc. So I have several types of heterogeneity occurring, so I need to control for that. Ideally, I think, as Emmanuel emphasized, you should go to the level of the transaction. First of all, because that's the unit of analysis of TCE and all those transaction cost-based theories. So basically, if I were an empirical researcher in that area, I would actually not only observe the percentage of franchised units in a certain chain, but actually take a look at each individual decision to open up a new store. So I'm deciding to open, I'll open up a new store, I don't know, in Gavia. So that's a particular decision. So let's observe the attributes of the transaction, the characteristics of the location, of the entrepreneurs, whatever, and then let's model, or let's see what happens. It was franchised, or it was chosen as a own unit. I would go actually to the level of the transaction, because otherwise you may miss critical sources of heterogeneity. And of course, in this process, you should also, I mean, if I'm observing this particular decision to open up a new store, you should also take into consideration the number of other franchised stores and other units that are around, whatever, so you can actually pick up the systemic effect, right? So I do believe, and if we push this logic further, even the performance of the system should be evaluated at the local level. Not, I mean, the profitability of McDonald's, this is too aggregate. So you should actually observe profitability, productivity, whatever, of the store, right? And therefore, you can answer some questions of like those alignment studies that you have. I mean, for instance, what is the, attributes of the transaction would mandate or would suggest that this store should be owned, but the store is franchised. So let's see what is the difference in performance, right? So at the local level, that's what I would do, I mean, empirically. I'm not a researcher in that area, as you can see, right? So second point, also raised by Emmanuel, but also, it also appeared in your presentation, which is complementarity. Critical. However, Emmanuel, I think it's not sufficient to actually list the advantages of one type and the advantages of the other. I think you should answer the following question: how having another franchised store increases the productivity, performance, profitability, whatever, of my own stores, or vice versa? That's the complementarity effect. So you need actually to pin down the actual mechanism generated that particular spillover. And I remember a study by Pierre Azoulay. I don't know if you cited one paper by Pierre Azoulay, that former Robert Gibbons student, but I think it was a different one, because he was discussing this complementarity effect in another setting, which is outsourcing of labor. But then we can draw some parallels. And the logic is very simple, actually. So suppose I have long-term employees and I have outsourced employees, right? And all of a sudden I have a problem with my firm, I need to fire someone. If I fire my long-term employees, that will destroy my reputation, right, as a good employer. This will destroy the relational contracts that I have within my firm, and therefore, it may be optimal for me to actually fire the temporary workers first. And that is a complementarity effect, because in a situation where you have uncertainty or variations in demand, variations of several types of variations, it may be optimal for you to have some permanent guys that who will allow you, or those types of arrangements will allow you to sever those contracts more easily without destroying your reputation as a long-term employer, etc. And this appears, Vivian, in your empirical analysis when you discuss quantity, sources of variations in quantity. So I have a long-term supplier, and I have a bunch of other suppliers. I cannot. I mean, if I have a negative shock in my demand, of course I'll need to cut down my supply. But then I will do that with the temporary guys, the market guys, not the guys I have a long-term partnership, right? So that will guarantee this generates some sort of complementarity. But I would actually say that if you go in that direction, you need to really be specific about the complementarity effect, right? So that is one. This appears in your presentation. But also, I should also actually call the attention that you may also have negative spillovers when you have those mixed forms. And the case I have in mind was a case written by a former student of mine, undergraduate student, about about McDonald's. I don't know if you remember. About 10 years ago, McDonald's had a huge conflict with its franchisees, basically. 1/3 of the franchisees were in litigation, actually suing McDonald's here. Why? Because McDonald's opened up so many own stores, and even stores closed, wholly owned, close to the franchisees, that they were actually very angry because their revenues actually dropped, and then they are not making money. And so sometimes if we increase also the number of owned units, etc., it may generate a negative effect. So I will not actually only talk about complementarity in a positive way, but also consider the possibility that there may be negative effects, right? So this is my second comment. Third comment. Please don't forget power explanations or market power, bargaining power. And this appears heavily in your study. Actually, Paulo Furquim has wrote about that in his doctoral thesis in 1912, right? No, 1996. Look at this hair, right? It's great. The glasses. So it's about power. Don't forget about that, because transaction cost economics is about efficiency, and Williamson hates power-based explanation. My own experience as a consultant working or talking to business people is that this is hugely important. I remember a consulting job I was involved with a long time ago. I'm also you know, a long, old-fashioned guy. Oh, no, I don't know if this is the correct word, but that's okay. I remember I was working, it's a consulting job. We were helping a soybean trading company, and that trading company actually bought and worked as a trading, buying and selling soybeans on the market, basically. But the company had a processing plant to process soybeans. It was, I guess, I don't remember, it was about 20 or 30% of the whole volume of soybeans, but they actually processed the soybeans to produce soybean oil and soybean meal. What's the name of meal? Farelo, right? Soybean meal. And they were losing money with that unit, that processing unit. And we asked them, well, okay, if you're losing money, why do you have this processing unit? And they said, that's because this increases my bargaining power with the other guys like Cargill and et cetera, and they know that I have a processing plant, and therefore they know that I have an option. And this also appears in Orange, right? Same argument, and Vivian, you talked about cartels and everything. I think it's the same explanation. So I've seen this explanation a lot in the real world, and I think with TCE we went too far, ignoring power evidence-based explanations, and I think, of course, efficiency explanations are important, but we should go back to this, or at least consider that possibility really should pay attention to that. So that's it. I really enjoyed the presentations, so thanks a lot.
I think I have a problem with franchising because I really, it's hard for me to understand what kind of organizational arrangement franchise is. Because I always deal with my old definition, Penrosian definition of a firm. Firm is a unique collection of productive resources. So franchise is something very strange for me. It's something that does not fit in any definition that I really work with. So the first thing is this definition. The firm is a unique collection of productive resources. And the second problem is strategy. Well, franchise as an organizational arrangement, how does franchise grows? Because the growth of the firm is another problem. It's a problem of strategy. So how is the question, how franchise deals with the question of strategy, growth strategy? So I have this puzzle in my head. I cannot really understand what kind of organizational arrangement. I remember very well when I entered a McDonald's in Rome, in Piazza di Spagna. And I entered, it was entirely different to McDonald's. It has a wonderful salad, completely unusual for the McDonald's. And this was, for me, a specific, unique collection of resources. Although it was a franchise, was very specific, was very original, has nothing to do with McDonald's all over the world. So this is my conjecture. I would like very much to know what you think about it.
Congratulations for the research and the presentations, very rich, very stimulating. I would suggest that you take a look also to the other side of the transaction, because sometimes I feel that this is, in this theory, the transaction cost theory, sometimes you look too much on the governor of the governance and forget a little bit from who is being governed. And one problem of this is to forget at least the asymmetry in the bargaining process. If you don't like to use the power, bargaining power, maybe the asymmetry in the position to make a bargain. And in another way, I think you have different contracts for the same kind of business, for the same strategy. You are differentiating your product based on quality or agreeing something, and you have different suppliers. And these different suppliers have different scales, for instance. It's very different from one supplier to accept a contract that says that you have a price for some quantity, or if you are a large-scale supplier, you can risk more, and so you can accept a supply that says, in the end of the day, I will share with you the profits. So it's the same thing, but you have different suppliers with different risk preferences, for instance. So I would suggest to take a look at this. And
sorry, I have a very short remark, okay? And the remark is the following. I agree with your suggestions, but should not be referred to them or even to Claude, but to the Williamson story. Because after all, we had, thanks to them, this very huge literature now on plural forms, But the question is why now we still start with the puzzle of plural forms. Maybe the puzzle is another one, since we have so many plural forms. So the puzzle is why we should expect to have the Williamsonian word. And probably Jeff could come to help us in remembering that before Williamson, there was the commons notion of transaction, which was not limited to bilateral transactions, but in the definition of commons, in a transaction you have 5 agents, the enforcer, the trading parties, and 2 alternative parties which are the outside option. All of them determines the bargaining power and the market power. So I think that they are right in this respect. The question is whether this is a puzzle. Maybe it is not a puzzle. It's just one way to put together the market and the contract together. So there are several theories. I will come back on these in commenting one of the paper which is on plural forms later on.
I really liked both presentations, and my short comment is the following. Just to stress that I'm a law professor, and the legal field, the legal realism brought in some years ago a very insightful message that maybe it's helpful for you. That the variety of forms of contract can be even higher if you take into account that each of this structure that you present for us, the contract, the vertical integration, and so on, comprehends several ways to be several ways of being established in the real world, beyond the formal label. I mean, a contract is not exactly or not only a formal contract as you described in the literature. The studies, like the study of Stuart Macaulay, for instance, non-contractual relationships. There are several ways to organize a contract in the real world beyond the formal definition of a contract, which stress your point. That's
just a small question. I'm concerned with the puzzle of plural forms. I suspect that the puzzle of plural forms comes only if you accept the Williamson's hypothesis of discrete structural alignment. But I think that hypothesis is very strange because it presupposes that you have not enough rationality, substantive rationality, to make a full contingent contract. But you have enough rationality to necessarily converge to the better governance structure. So just a question, should we really stick to the discrete alignment hypothesis? The problem is not the hypothesis itself. When you have bounded rationality, why should you converge to any equilibrium or something like that, optimum governance, structured governance?
Well, actually, there were so many interesting questions, and if we dedicated ourselves to deal with all of them, we probably will miss the excellent parallel sessions that we have in few minutes. So we are discussing now to finish and to still discussing all these subjects in our interaction during today and tomorrow. Okay? Thank you.
Sorry about that. Just a quick announcement here. Thank you, Luis Fernando, for chairing this session. We have 5 parallel sessions supposed to begin at 5 p.m. Of course, we're going to be late. And, well, here I have is 4. Yes, at 4. Supposed to begin at 4. And just to make the announcement of the number of the rooms, and the first session, Agribusiness and Institutions, chaired by Paulo and Silvia Kaleman, you'll be in the room 218. Okay? 18. This. The same level there? Yeah. The second session, chaired by Sergio Lazzarini, combining theories to address organizational and institutional phenomena. 219. Third session, hybrid arrangements, chaired by Claude and Luis Fernando. 223. 223. The session chaired by Basilia and Carlos, Institutions and Policy, and the session chaired by Antonio Nichita and Ronaldo Fiani will take place in this room. So we're gonna make an arrangement here, split the room in two, okay? And for the second bunch of parallel sessions that's supposed to begin 10 to 6, Agribusiness and Institutions 2, Emmanuel and Luis Fernando, 218. Environment and Institutions, chaired by Maria da Graça and Hildo Meirelles, 219. Institutions and Industrial Policy, chaired by Geoff Hodgson and Leah Hasenclever, will be 223. And Agribusiness and Institutions 3, chaired by Beth Farina and Vivian, will be in this salon. Well, that's general announcements.